All right, so this lesson is going to be over logic puzzles, and it's just a continuation off of our previous lesson where we used that law of syllogism to connect two sentences to come up with a conclusion. In today's, we will just have multiple sentences that we are going to connect to then come up with, we're going to just call it a theorem in today's. Okay, so reading our instructions, we have translate each sentence in the following puzzles into a conditional statement. You may use symbols or keywords. I'm probably going to use the keywords. Then in the space provided to the left of each statement, you are going to write numbers to indicate the sequence the sentences will be in when linked. Use a C with a number if the contrapositive is needed. And then finally, write the theorem in a full sentence on the line at the end of each puzzle. Okay, so looking at the first sentence, we have, as a result of you becoming smart, you will become a doctor. So the first thing I want to just kind of start off with is just seeing right here that as a result, if you remember, is going to be a key word for our if. Okay, so because of that, our hypothesis is going to be you becoming smart, and our conclusion will be you becoming a doctor. Okay, so I'm going to use just smart and doctor as my keywords off to the side. Okay, then in the next sentence, we have you cured cancer, therefore you will go down in history. Okay, so in this sentence here, our key word is going to be the therefore, and that's telling me that that is going to be a then. Okay, so that means that my hypothesis is you curing cancer, and my conclusion is you going down in history. So I'm going to use just cancer as my keyword for the hypothesis and history for my conclusion. All right, moving on to the next sentence, we have because you are a student, you love to read. Okay, so in this sentence here, I'm going to be highlighting because, and that is the phrase that I am using to determine that this is going to be an if. Okay, so that means that you are a student is going to be my hypothesis, and you love to read is my conclusion. So I'm just going to write off to the side. I've got student, and I'm going to use just love. Okay, sentence 4. Provided that you don't cure cancer, you will not become a doctor. Okay, so here I'm going to start off with provided that. And that's going to be my if. Okay, which is going to make not curing cancer my hypothesis and not becoming a doctor my conclusion. Okay, so I'm going to use the cancer and the doctor, and because they are both nots, I'm just going to use that little squiggly in front. Okay, next one, you become smart due to the fact that you read often. Okay, so due to the fact is going to be my little indicator of the order here, and that is going to be an if. Okay, which means the reading often is my hypothesis and the becoming smart is my conclusion. Okay, so I'm going to use read and smart. All right, and then our last sentence, we have, since you love to read, you read often. Okay, so I'm going to highlight since, and that's going to be my if. So my hypothesis is love to read, and my conclusion is read often. Okay, so over here, I'm just going to use the love I had earlier, and my read often, I used read. All right, so once I have done that, I'm going to just look at my keywords, and I want to find the keywords that did not repeat. Okay, so looking at them, let's see, I believe we've got student, did not repeat, and then we also did not repeat history. Okay, so student and history are going to be my start and my stop. It does not matter which one. My preference, honestly, is going to be that since student is already in the hypothesis spot and history is already in the conclusion, I'm going to start off with student, and that means I'll just end with that history. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you might do the contrapositive of my sentence. That might be your answer, and that's okay. It just means you decided to start with history instead of that student, which, remember, the conditional and the contrapositive are equivalent statements. So you would still be correct. Your order would look different, and your final sentence would be the contrapositive of mine. Okay, so I'm going to look over here, and I'm going to use this to help me write it out, the sequence. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to start with student. So that's going to be my number 1. Oops. Okay. Now, student ends off at love, so I want to look and see, well, love is going to pick back up in that last sentence down here, so I'm going to label that sentence 2. Then I have read. Okay, I noticed that read is going to be just that statement right above it, actually. Okay, so read's going to end in smart, so I want to pick up at smart, which is that sentence up top. So that's going to be my number 4. Doctor, well, I do see doctor down here, okay, but it says not doctor, okay? So remember, I also want to start off with it, so us writing that contrapositive will bring it to the front where I want it, and it will get rid of that not that I currently have in it. So just going to scroll over here with this one, we would write that 5C. All right, and then that means, but let's just double check it, that last sentence should be, yes, number 6. Okay, because remember when I wrote that contrapositive, it will allow me to end that sentence with the cancer that I am picking up with right before I end in that history. Okay, So now that I have that, I've got my order to write my theorem. Like I said, we're going to just connect that very first hypothesis with the last conclusion. And so we should have those keywords, student and history there. So let me just scroll in here. So I'm going to have if you are a student, then you will go down in history. Okay, and then like I said, also depending on how you write it, you might have had, if you do not go down in history, then you are not a student. Okay, that would just be that contrapositive of what I got. All right, now we're going to move down where we've got our logic puzzle with errors. Okay, so a lot of this is going to be the exact same, but there's a few other sentences added in here. So translate each sentence in the following puzzle into a conditional. You may use symbols or keywords. Then in the space provided to the left of each sentence, write numbers to indicate the sequence the sentences will be linked in. Use a C with a number if a contrapositive is needed. Finally, write the theorem in a full sentence on the line at the end of each puzzle. If a converse or an inverse is needed to make the sentences link, then write the word converse or inverse in front of the number. If there are any errors, explain in the space provided. Okay, so if we think back to a previous lesson, we had, like I said, that the original and the contrapositive are equivalent sentences, but the converse and the inverse are going to make it invalid. Okay, so that's why here we're going to have those errors, which it's going to be the exact same thing. The only difference is we'll just write out those words in front of our number, and then we'll just need to explain the errors that we had down below. All right, so doing the same thing that we did with that first problem, okay, we're going to have you enjoy cutting onions due to the fact that you don't cry easily. Okay, well, starting off, I'm going to highlight my due to the fact, because that's going to be my if. Okay, so that means that you not crying easily is my hypothesis, and enjoying cutting onions is my conclusion. So I'm going to just say don't cry, and then I'll just say onions. Okay. Next sentence, provided that you eat a lot of carbohydrates, you love ramen. Okay, well, that provided that is going to be helpful in determining that that is going to be my hypothesis, where we have that you eat a lot of carbohydrates. Okay, and then love ramen is my conclusion. So we'll have eat, and ramen. Okay, since you are not a strong person, you cry easily. I'm going to highlight since. and that is my if. Okay, so you are not a strong person is going to be my hypothesis, and you cry easily is my conclusion. So say not strong. We'll say cry. Right? You eat a lot of carbohydrates because you are a strong person. So we've got our because here. So that's going to be a keyword for if, which means strong person is my hypothesis, and eating a lot of carbohydrates is my conclusion. Right? You don't love pasta when you don't love ramen. Okay, so when is an if. Okay, so don't love ramen is going to be my hypothesis, and don't love pasta will be my conclusion. All right, our last sentence, we have all cooks enjoy cutting onions. Okay, so no keywords here. We're going to go ahead and say that our hypothesis is going to be cooks and then onions is my conclusion. All right, so let's look and see what we have here. All right, so where do I have two things that are not talked about anywhere else? Well, I see cooks, so I'm going to highlight that. And then I also see pasta, so that not pasta right here. Okay, and as I mentioned in the previous one, once again, it's up to you. This one I have, once again, where my cooks is already in the hypothesis spot. My not pasta is in the conclusion. So I'm going to go ahead and leave them how they are. I'm going to go ahead and start with that cooks as my number one. Okay, so that means we've got to pick up with onions. Well, I have an onions up here in that first sentence, but it is unfortunately at the conclusion spot. So I need to just bring it to the front. I need them to switch places. I don't want to negate it. So this is going to be where we're going to have an error. We're going to have that converse is going to be used here. Okay, so I'm going to write converse and then I'll just number it number 2. Okay, so that means that not cry is going to be where I need to pick up. Well, I do see a cry right here. Once again, I do need to bring it to the front. So I've got to switch places, but I also want to negate it because I have that not in front of this one, but here we don't. Okay, so we are going to actually do the contrapositive with this one. So So I'm going to label that as a 3C. Okay, and that means that we are going to need to pick up at strong, which happens to be the one right below it. So we're going to call that number 4. Okay, so now we have eat. Well, I've got an eat in that second sentence. So I'm going to call that number 5. Okay, that means I'm going to end at ramen. Well, the last sentence that I had left over, this one down here, that second to last one, I have ramen in the spot that I want it in, but I do need to negate it. So I'm going to actually use the inverse with this one. It will be number 6, but I'm going to write inverse with it. All right, so we have my order. Now we just need to write my theorem. Okay, so number 1, we are starting with the cooks. And then number 6, we have an inverse. So instead of it saying not pasta, we will say pasta. So we'll say, if you are a cook, then you love pasta. Okay, and then as it mentioned earlier, it just wants us to identify where the errors were, even though we did it up above. We're just going to write that in sentence 2, we had that converse error. And inverse error in number 6. All right, and that is it for that second problem. All right, so hopefully that was helpful. Like I said, you knowing those keywords is going to be super important. That's going to help you identify the order and everything, because if you don't know those keywords, you might have it switched, and then maybe your sentences don't flow the exact way. So just be very careful and definitely make sure you are studying those keywords.